Listen, I'm with the IDE. The IDE is about looking at how people are going to work, live, and prosper in the digital economy. And that's not only people, but it's organizations too. And so they've asked me just to share a couple slides on how we can think about future work, but then the real experts are the ones actually doing the future work here, and then we'll get into that. Okay? So let's take a look at what we had to say here. Listen, you know, we're seeing a lot of headlines that look like this. Can you read that over on that side? Bosses believe that your work skills will soon be useless. You know, we had a lot of talk about robots there. I hope it's not really like that, right? But we are hearing a lot more here also about living and finding meaning in a world without work. Listen, my world without work is going to be in about 20 years when I retire. I hope there's still work to do there. I hope there's still work to do for my kids, right? And so, you know, how do you get ready for it? We're seeing stories like this. Owning your own future. Do these 5 things right now to still be employable in a decade. How do you robot-proof your children's careers, right? This is pretty scary stuff we're hearing. And yet in organizations, while we do hear routine work going away, there's still work to be done, and hopefully there is still work to be done in the future. This is what we know. If you look at this quote from my colleague David Autor, he looked at change in demand for jobs between 1980 and 2005. And you see there's a giant dip in the middle. And that giant dip is scary if you are a middle manager. Who are these people that don't have jobs anymore? They're basically white-collar paper pushers, right? They're moving paper around and getting paid more than they should for that. And computers now do that better, and those people don't have jobs. The jobs that are still there, though, are on the low end. If you have to touch things, computers aren't so good at that yet. Now, we don't pay for it, but there are jobs there. And at the high end, data science, finding new sources of oil, those kinds of things, there are still jobs there. But you know, the situation is getting worse. This is a paper from David Deming just last year. And you see how that curve is moving down at the high end, right? So in the 80s and 90s, there was still decent demand for the high-end jobs. Over the 90s to 2000s, less demand. Over the 2000s to 2010s, less demand. So what's happening? The computers were pretty good at moving paper around, coordinating processes. They've gotten a lot better at doing other high-end tasks now. And there's a question about what's left. What they're still not good at is a lot of the low end, but on the other hand, I just sat down today, out of 140 million workers in the world, 4 million of them drive something. And so if you believe Otto and Google and others, that's 4 million people, 3% of the population, who will be unemployed. And when we're at a 4.5% unemployment rate and 3% go unemployed, that starts looking like a recession just with one technology change. Okay? Now, we know it's not going to happen right away, right? But you know, we're seeing what's happening at the high end. Well, for example, this is kind of some stuff we're seeing, right? This is MIT Technology Review. Algorithm summarizes lengthy text surprisingly well. Well, one interesting correlation to that, low-end lawyers are starting to lose their jobs. Right? So how do we think about the jobs that we're going to have here in the future? Well, you know, we ran some numbers, and we identified 7 skills in the economy. You could see the skills here, right? From supervision, equipment, physical, perception, which means pattern recognition, and teamwork. You see these. These are broad skills across the economy. And what we're able to put a wage on them. Having a unit of this in your job pays you more or less than others. So what you don't want to have is a job where you touch anything. You see that? Every standard deviation of physicalness in your job pays you $4 an hour less than average. It's being protected only by minimum wage. And we know minimum wage is not something that we can live on, right? Where's the money still to be made? Supervision. Working with equipment, technology, and initiative. These are all paying $3 or $4 an hour more for every unit in there. What's interesting about that, what do great senior executives do? They supervise, they're often working with equipment, and they have a lot of initiative. So if we're thinking about what are the skills for the future, maybe it's these ones. The other side of things is when we run the numbers, is whether technology is complementing or substituting. These ones are complemented by IT instead of being substituted. So what don't you want to do? Touch things. What do you want to do? Supervise things, work with the technology, and have jobs where initiative is required. Okay? So What do I mean by that? Well, hopefully this idea of complementing instead of substituting, hopefully it doesn't look like this picture. Can you read that picture? Up here, what it is it's a bunch of robots, and then there's a glass up there that says, if you need help, break glass, and that's the human coming out to fix the robot, right? Hopefully it's not that, but we do see some of these things, right? You see the Matrix style, augmentation, the guy driving the robot, right? To help with the physical stuff. But how about this, the robot brain surgeon taking 2 hours out of brain surgery. They are not doing the brain surgery, but they are taking a 2-hour process of opening your skull and turning it into 2 minutes. That's complementing with technology. And then the other one is new designs. Can we think about, rather than complementing or substituting, can we think about redesigning the work? And so we have this group called the Initiative on the the IIC. Thank you. Devin is here, aren't you? Devin runs that challenge. It's our DARPA Grand Challenge for work, the Inclusive Innovation Challenge. Just 3 of our winners were thinking about redesigning work there. 99 Degrees Custom is bringing apparel manufacturing back to Lawrence, Massachusetts. We did it for many years. We didn't anymore. This is custom apparel manufacturing. Yes, you can apprentice on the sewing machine, but then you can move up and learn 3D printing and other really cool stuff that's a better job. And because it's custom, you want to do it nearby. Another way of redesigning the work, Iora Health, their health, as you'd expect. They take care of you the way health places would, but they've got a lot of relatively low-skilled people who are health coaches. And those health coaches help you think about how to be healthy, how to know when you're sick, how to make sure you get through. That's a good job for a low-skilled person. It's also good for the patients and for the company. And then the last one I love is called Doct Hers. Turns out that in Pakistan, a lot of women get medical degrees and then their families will not let them work for whatever reason. And you've got an awful lot of poor women who would love to see a doctor and either can't or need to see a female doctor. And so what does Doct Hers do? Telehealth. They'll send nurses out there, but then these doctors who can't work outside the home get to do house calls through telehealth, working with that nurse. And these poor women that can't afford a doctor get to have the help of a doctor because that's happening. That's redesigning work. So these are the other options that we've been thinking about in terms of what does the future of work look like. But why don't we jump to our panel here and let them talk about what they're doing in their organizations to make these things happen. Okay. So let's start here with Cynthia Neustadt. Cynthia was a finalist in our award a few years back. Yep. And she's one of those other examples of how being a finalist in the award turns you into something else.
That's right.
And so Cynthia is now the head of strategy
at
Agile Health.
It's all George.
Exactly, great. So
and
go
right.
ahead. So what are you doing here? Sorry, just tell about who you are and what your company does.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. He's right. I was the former CIO, but I hate to say former because no matter what, if you're technology in your blood, it stays with you in every role and every sphere that you're in. I'm currently the Chief Strategy Officer at HMS, and we are focused on making healthcare efficient. And no, that's not an oxymoron. But if you are in the healthcare field or study that, financially, it is at a breakneck speed to bust our GDP budgets. And so we have to do something. Now, we are not in the care side of this equation. We're on the billing side, the efficiency of knowing where your benefits are, who pays, coordinating care, what I would call non-caregiving waste. And so we're doing everything we can to strip out that waste so that money can go back into the true GDP and help us as taxpayers. So we are focused on this area because every process that we do, there is disruptors out there, right? There's great innovators, there's great PE money in healthcare today, but they're almost all point solutions. And you really can't take that whole work stream process because there's lobbyists, policymakers, stakeholders, attorneys, all in that stream. And so we're focused on how do we knit together work processes in a stream that can be automated, more than just piece by piece into units. And there'll be plenty of work for the future. And I'll comment a little further on where I see some of that going in a minute.
Great, thank you. This is not Steve Gold. Steve Gold was supposed to be here. His wife is ill. He had to stay home with her. So Dave Neitz was generous enough to stand in here and serve on the panel today. So Dave, can you introduce yourself?
Yep, Dave Neitz, I'm the CIO. an SVP of CDM Smith. We're a global construction engineering firm. And our industry has fundamentally not changed in 100 years, 100 plus years. It's basically hard hats, a lot of construction equipment, engineers that have advanced marginally from drafting boards to computers. But we are at a tipping point in our industry as well where we can't continue to just build things the way we've always been building them because it's not sustainable. The cost figure that you've seen bantered about to fix some of that aging infrastructure is not sustainable for our country nor for developing countries to afford it. So we're looking at how we change the entire equation from the engineering part where we're doing some optioneering, which is going to be augmented by artificial intelligence, eventually taking over by artificial intelligence and machine learning, to construction where 3D printers have evolved to the point where they can input concrete and you put the full three-dimensional model in there and it will develop a complete structure in a matter of days, not years or weeks. So we are understanding how we change the way we work, how we engage our clients, how we actually operate that asset, and the whole promise of taking smart infrastructure to create the outcome of smart cities.
Thank you. Simone Vernon is from Thomson Reuters.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be back on campus, by the way.
Oh, that's right, a graduate, yeah.
So I'm the CTO of an organization called Thomson Reuters Labs that encompasses all our research and development, our Center for Artificial Intelligence, as well as our global innovation labs that partner with universities, startups, and customers to do a lot of sort of agile design thinking, exploration of new business ideas. And so Thomson Reuters is a large information service provider. We look at sectors that are getting completely transformed. We serve lawyers, people in the financial services space, and as well as in the sort of risk and regulatory compliance space, and as well as in tax and accounting. So if you look at this knowledge work that encompasses our clients, the fact is their entire world is changing. And so as a trusted partner to our clients for many, many years, we're starting to see how the confluence of few things, I think it's not just AI, but it's a confluence of things like business models that are platform-based, rethinking how you look at work like through crowdsourcing, and the incredible advances made in AI are coming together and changing those works. I'd love to talk about some of the things we're seeing there.
Okay, thanks. And then Ernest Ding from Salesforce.com.
Yeah, so I'm Ernest. I work at Salesforce. It's a big enterprise software company, 4th largest in the world. And what I do there is I lead global HR strategy and people analytics. So really leading a team of data scientists and strategy consultants looking at how do we make the workforce more efficient, effective, and engaged, while also really transforming the way that we look at work as well.
Thank you. So let's start off with a question. Mona, you deal with, you said you're seeing a lot of these changes happen in your clients. What are some specifics you're seeing that the future work is changing jobs?
So you were talking about the lawyers, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what's happening there is pretty significant. I think and I'm kind of hearing I have a bit of a feedback here. I don't know if you guys can hear it. So in the legal space, there is really an opportunity for lawyers to, and it's happening already, to use analytics to have a better sense of what's happening in their litigation. So there's analysis of how a judge might rule, or being able to use data visualization and tools under the umbrella of AI, like natural language processing, to really extract information in a way that essentially makes them superhumans. So, and to me, that actually enhances the kind of work that lawyers are going to be doing, and it's going to create a competitive edge for the firms that are really employing those things. So that's not really actually the future of work. It's happening right now.
But that sounds like, so the lawyers have Moneyball on which cases are going to win and which they're going to lose, and
exactly. So that
wow.
The Moneyball for lawyers is happening. I think there's confluence of also thinking about how you might crowdsource or bring intelligence from various places and pull that in. And so that trend is absolutely there. There's about 500 legal tech startups. It's a whole industry. So, and that's really happening because there's a confluence of data being more shareable, technology being at a point where you can innovate on the cloud and test those solutions much faster and really figure out to solve specific pain points for lawyers. And we're seeing that across different segments of professionals as well.
Okay, great. And Cynthia, I know you're thinking hard about this in your role as strategy. This is important, right?
Yes.
So what kinds of specific examples do you have here?
You know, I don't want to be flip, but every healthcare conference I go to has 90% of the sponsors or vendors are AI or NLP vendors, because that's the catchy term of today. I could walk booth by booth and I can say, oh, fake, that won't work, fake, that won't work. And there's very few ones that really intrinsically get to the value of what we're doing today. Most, what I would call baseline, what we're doing in strategy is, we have many disparate systems across the healthcare community, whether you're a payer sponsor or a provider sponsor. And for a variety of reasons, integration and HIPAA and all of the past policies don't work. And so we're using basic AI to just lift and copy, to be basic, to just take one by one a system that someone's playing in, begin to shut them down, and use it as a simplifier, which translates into efficiency, which translates into money. And that's, I want to see healthcare fast forward and use AI in extremely awesome ways. The health coaching one that you gave is a good example. The hard part as a consumer, I can see it from a strategy and a vendor mind of, oh, that'll save us money and we can reach more people. But from a consumer, I'm like, oh gosh, a chatbot's gonna text me. It's not personal. And so if we can leverage AI and NLP to remove some of the waste, to take workers that are in less skilled roles and amp them up to do a more intimate one-on-one type relationship, then that's where I'd like to see us head.
So what would you say as far as the percentage of people in your company that are going to need to rethink their jobs? Sorry, I didn't prepare you for this.
I would probably say 80%.
80%?
Yeah, I would, because it's, and I hate to do that, because it's, in our company, we have about 2,500, 2,700 employees. A good 25% of them are fairly low wage, right? They're calling up and doing verifications of eligibility, verifying benefits, checking claims, which is a fairly manual role, and they have to do it because we couldn't get it through any electronic means. That entire work base goes away. Many of the last panel, the technologists, we've got some old technologies in healthcare, and I don't think a lot of them will translate. And what you and I talked about a week or so ago was, I need that workforce to amp up. I don't need necessarily specific technologists. I need people who are technology-minded that can knit disparate analytics, data, work streams together and kind of be a superhuman computer looking at it from a different lens. And if they come with experience and they can apply technological kind of a background, great.
Well, and that would then call for the initiative too, right? Because if you have to reprogram your job, you got to at least take the initiative to make that happen.
That's right.
So let's just continue this straight down. Dave, how many people are going to have to retool their jobs in your organization?
Well, I would say in the construction industry, probably about 95%.
95, wow. Okay, Mona,
Now,
how about in the organizations you see, accounting and lawyers?
I think it's the same trend, right? It's getting people, like if you look in accounting space, an auditor was doing a very manual work and looking at sample. Now they can look at the full corpus and focus on the risk. And so, that is a higher value job, and I think that's coming. I don't know what the percent of that would look like, but it's probably in the same realm that you described.
But I also see in our industry, the engineering, which is highly skilled, they have professional engineering certifications. They are going to take on a different role as well. They may have some of their role replaced by a concept where the computer can run through millions of options and iterations. But ultimately, you're going to need that engineer that understands the physics around engineering and their various disciplines to really interpret that. And then that will kind of extend into the virtual design and construction element, and then ultimately operating it in a smart city concept. So it's going to just change people's roles. It's going to be pushing that thought leadership down into the construction and then into the operating of the smart city concept for
I think
us.
ultimately it's going to be 100% of people need to
Everybody's
going to need to think about ways where they can grow, and they're always going to have to be growing rather than, okay, I'm safe. Even as a data scientist, data science is going to become commoditized, right? You have a lot of platforms out there where you just plug data in and it picks from 300 different models, parallel processes all of them, and spits out the right model for you to use. That's gonna be commoditized to a certain extent. So I'm gonna have to actually, step up my game in terms of some of the things that you talked about in terms of supervision, leadership, initiative. Those are all things that everybody's gonna have to learn how to do.
So one of the things you've been doing, Ernest, is thinking really hard about how to help your people reskill. So what are some of the things you're doing?
Yeah, so some of the things that we do, we really focus on collecting a lot of data around goals, around feedback, and using NLP and AI and machine learning to really start to nudge people into those different roles or into those different learning opportunities. Because there's a great quote from the CEO of IBM where she says that growth and comfort cannot coexist.
Wow.
Right? And so we have to keep growing people and making people uncomfortable in the position that they are, and nudging them and using sort of behavioral economic principles to really start to grow and develop people and create that growth mindset.
It feels a little Big Brother-ish, though, doesn't it? I'm going to be monitoring you and running numbers on you and telling you what to do.
I mean, that's where the trust comes in terms of what we don't want to do is we don't want to say we're going to employ these technologies and essentially we're going to employ AI and machine learning and your job's going to be wiped out, right? What we want to say is we're going to employ these technologies, augment your skill, and really help you along the way to transform your own career.
Yeah, Mona.
So I think one of the things that I'm hearing in this conversation is I haven't talked about. Okay, so first, there is no such thing as AI out of the box, right? Technology vendors make it sound like it's really easy. What it really comes together, and we don't talk about it as much, is first of all, the domain expertise is critical, the business context, the value context, and that is still not near the singularity point. We still need humans for that. The other is the quality of the content, the work that is still so painful, maybe more advanced in your organization, of pulling the data together, making sense of it, and then the technology comes in. But so there is still a whole set of expertise required and a lot of work to be done to take advantage of those things. But as we do and we get to this place, I do think there is a lot of people who are going to get augmented, and there are people who are going to be left behind, and it's a very difficult conversation because you're going to lift some people and others are not going to be able to follow, and I think that's the hard conversation we have to get to. What happens to the folks who did a lot of the review of contracts, which now can be done through analytics, and that analytics is then augmenting the higher value added thinkers? What do we do with the people that just reviewed those?
So, this reminds me of when I was growing up. My family's from central Pennsylvania, and when the mills and the mines closed down, the 25-year-olds moved and found new jobs. The 45-year-olds waited for the mines to reopen. And so have you been thinking through this situation you just raised here, Mona, as these people start to become surplus? Is this something your firms should be thinking about, or is this something that society should be thinking? Have you been thinking through that process? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll give an example of how we're using, we're in a key transformation, and we're using some support from Dr. Cotter down the street, sorry. But we are focused on employing volunteerism at our company, right? So what happens in work products, right, you're in a certain track. You're in a career ladder, a career path, right? 1980s, 1990s, HR Philosophy 101. But what happens is at work, you forget who you were before you walked in that door. And so you're trapped in a ladder. If that ladder goes away, if that mine closes, what happens to that person? Well, if they have the business domain expertise, as Mona says, you want them to stay. But you also want them to stay with unleashing the passion for something they chose to work in. And so whatever, I don't care what generation philosophy you harbor to, but in our company, out of the 2,500 employees, 1,600 are in our volunteer army, which means we put out requests and says, hey, I need someone that could do organizational development and training in this kind of topic. And then we just say, please, whoever wants to post in and volunteer for that role, do it. Well, that's just one example of hundreds that we've done, and it blows your mind away about the skills that are harboring in your company that you didn't even know were there. Right, I mean, PhD level OD, they're people who were in an analyst role, probably because that was the job available 10 years ago. And so it's kind of neat to watch this research experiment of unleashing the passion and allowing people to navigate their careers. It doesn't have to be their full-time job, it's just, I want to go play in over there. And if that blossoms and opens up into a new role, great. And so we're a year into that, and so I'm kind of using it as a good social experiment to see, does that help bridge the gap of staying, moving outside of your line of career path and allowing some flexibility as we mature.
Yeah, and we're kind of doing the same thing with really investing in innovation and trying to get people to across the business to engage in this innovation, and giving an opportunity to take a problem and work together outside of their discipline and collaborate with business technology, with HR, with whoever else has the desire. Again, it's the natural curiosity and desire to really learn something new. And it's really allowed people to blossom. I've had several people that were part of the legacy organization that have just done amazing things. Yeah. Others just have not really gotten the understanding what it means to look at things differently. So I think it's presenting that option, that culture of innovation. And my COO says, think crazy. So
think crazy.
Think crazy. If you think crazy, if it sounds absurd, then we're really stretching ourselves. So when I first joined the company, I said, hey, what about putting induction charging in the roads that we build so that electric cars don't have to find a charging station? And then 1 year later, UK is piloting that, trying that. So I got about 25 emails saying, you're not crazy. But that's kind of crazy thinking is what we're trying to encourage people to think outside of the box.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're doing at Salesforce is putting out all of our training materials in terms of how to build a Salesforce org for free for anybody to go and learn how to use Salesforce, and making our software as easy to use just through points and clicks versus actually having to code. And so it's this intersection between the software platform that we're providing plus also the training that's out there for anybody to learn to really start to skill themselves up and apply it in different use cases. And so I think that's the way that we're trying to approach it, is we're putting it out there. It's crazy, right? You give everybody a free license to learn how to upskill their current situation. It all sort of benefits society.
And in a way, if they take it on themselves to do this, that says something about them.
Correct.
Which is also really interesting. But it just reminds me of something else, too. I've lost count of the number of people I've heard over the years that said, the best thing that ever happened to me was getting fired from that job.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this may be a similar kind of thing, that it might make you just rethink what you're stuck in, assuming you can find that next thing to go to.
Exactly.
What do you guys do? Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the app. And are there any questions yet, Ray? OK, great. So just put them in there. We'll make sure we can ask the panel about those. By the way, those of you who have been here past years, this idea of the questions by, is that working for you? Because for me, at this standpoint, I love this. So, all right. So let's, as a couple more questions are coming in, let me just ask another question. Gig economy. That's the wave of the future, right? The right people are going to come in and fill the slots with you, and it's going to be perfect for jobs. Now, we're not sure it's perfect for people in the gig economy, but it's certainly. So what are you guys doing with gigs, with gig economy? Anything? Anybody?
So I love working with fintech startups. I think we learn a lot from the startups, actually. So there's actually a local example which I kind of like. It might not be really the gig economy, but it's a company called Quintopian. And what's really fascinating with that company is that the business model is the confluence, and I promise Eric and Andy are not paying me for this, but of the title of their forthcoming book, which is The Machine, the Platform, and the Crowd. And it turns out Quintopian brought this together. So what it is that, they basically bring a capacity for traders to own their strategy and not have that IP be tied to the firm they're part of. And so they sort of liberated the smart traders from having that strategy belong to the firm, but it belongs to them. Cool. And the best strategy is essentially crowd through analytics identified. So it's a crowd that owns their own IP, and it's a completely changing on its head the model that's been working in the industry. So it's not, it's not an Uber story, but it's this idea that when you take these three big trends, you can start coming up with entirely new ways of working, changing over models that everybody took for granted, and actually making something work that's completely different.
And what's that group called?
The company's called Quintopian, Boston-based.
Thanks.
So we've done something very similar. So we have a concept that we think we want to reuse our IP of some designs. And then we think, well, is that really what we should be doing, or should we be opening it up to say, why do we think we have, with our 5,000 employees, all the right combination of people that's going to come up with that next disruptive innovation? Because like I said, the problem, we can't continue to build things the way we've been building. We can't build more roads. We can't construct things the way we've been normally approaching them. So who knows who that next influencer will be? So we want to create this, let's forget about that IP component, and let's figure out how we put the problem out there in an open forum, and knowing that it's not going to be IP that we're going to be able to protect, and that's okay. That if we're the ones that can get it out there and start utilizing it and driving that wave, that'd be great. We have actually partnered with a startup company. It was Object Theory is the name of the company out of Portland. And that was another interesting one where you think, well, how would that have anything? It's their background's gaming. What does that have to do with anything in our industry? Well, in fact, they were the ones that helped us create this really innovative avatar collaboration capability. It was like, okay, because you do it in games, right? Because in the game, you have an avatar show up and you're playing games with somebody remote. But we're working together on a model, a three-dimensional model of art. So it's taking something that
Sorry, just to interrupt you, just so everybody gets this, right? So CDM Smith builds water treatment plants. They build dams, right?
Yeah.
So instead of jointly looking at blueprints, people put on VR goggles and they meet inside the dam.
Yeah.
And they can point around. It's totally cool stuff.
Yeah, it's a Microsoft HoloLens is what we're using. And we're in the cloud creating this collaboration capability with avatars. Now, you would think, well, wow, that's really bizarre, but not always. The collaboration you need to have, not everyone's physically together, and you want to be able to, at scale, present what the model looks like, and then have remote people collaborate with it at scale in the real world. And that's
So then if I'm from outside your company instead of inside, I can still put the goggles on and consult with you.
And you join the session in the cloud, and you show up, you see them, they see your avatar, you see their gaze by a dotted line, so you know what they're looking at, you hear them audio, you're all looking at the same model that's at scale within the real world.
So related to that, one of the popular questions here is, if we get rid of all the low-end work, then how do the future high-end people get their experience? Anybody want to take that?
Well, that's kind of interesting because our engineers earn their professional engineering degree, and that's a matter of experience and time. So when the regulatory agencies that grant these certifications by state, they have to rethink the process because generally it's a matter of time and experience that you built up doing the lesser, maybe all you did is design this element of it, but then you matured and developed the next level. So you were doing menial things that build up to the broader getting to the certification point. So the whole certification process in our industry has got to be thought through in a different way to say, if you're not doing that anymore, what does it mean to get your PE certification for a given state? If you're not doing those other tasks that build up to that PE certification.
I guess another way to think about it, so that's cool, right? So, rethinking what it means to be certified.
Yes.
And, you're certainly doing things, I think, where you're able to take what used to be high-end tasks and you can let more junior people do them, right?
Yes, yeah. And, this one, as you asked us earlier about societal thinking here, right, I kind of take a look back and think back. When in my teenage years, what job was I doing? Well, it was manual, it was cash-based, it was in the food industry, because that was the jobs that were available to teenagers. If I go to my daughters and where they're approaching, right, they're already in very advanced math concepts in elementary school. And I can kind of foresee, right, the freelancer economy coming. You know, maybe they pick up some work when they're teenagers doing freelance work, all technically based, and never leave the home. I mean, that's crazy thinking, but you can see the pattern of the education bringing them there, and that's available. And so when we're looking for workers and any one of those kind of crowdsourcing mentalities, that aperture gets opened up. So I would probably challenge us back societally. I do think we're already grooming more and more technically and logically capable kids. Maybe less common sense, but you know, more logical, because I think that's the primer, so that more and more of our information workers of 2 decades from now really do have a foundational skill set that can be leveraged across professions.
I still think that ultimately you're going to need some foundational knowledge, and whether you get that through, you know, basic working, the advanced stuff that you do, it needs to be derived from some foundational knowledge. And so you're not going to be able to do the advanced stuff if you don't actually know the foundational aspects of what you're supposed to be doing. So there needs to be a balance. It's not that the entire thing is going to get wiped out. You know, you still need to know how to do that kind of stuff, because if you don't, then how can I expect you to be able to do something more advanced?
I mean, I think we're seeing it already here, right? You're seeing business students taking R and knowing how to do coding.
Right.
You know, the reason why this whole legal tech startup ecosystem exploded was that Stanford connected their law school with their computer science school, and people started cross-registering in classes, and so now there's a generation of people out there building systems in that space. So I think the entry level just looks different. And these guys are imagining the future completely differently. They're looking at a process end to end and saying, hold on a second, you know, let me rethink the whole system, and this is how I would build it. And so I think it's a retooling of the whole industry. And that doesn't mean that basically low level might just, entry level is just different. A lawyer today is, maybe tomorrow, there'll be a lot more of them that actually know how to code. I mean, there's a guy who works for me who's a Harvard Law graduate, who's also our deep learning expert, and that's something he taught himself straight out of law school.
Cool, that's awesome. So let's get back to this there are a couple questions on education. So let me cold call you without any preparation, Mona, and then we can ask the rest of the people. You're one of our star graduates from the master's program. Right. You were an RA of some really cool projects we did. How could MIT change the way it trains people to get ready for this new economy?
I think there's 2 ways. So I'm really lucky to work with universities around the globe. And one of the models that I talk a lot about is, that I found really powerful, is the University of Waterloo, where basically it's souped up with a lot of, you know, every other semester practical training, where the kids go out there, and I have co-ops coming in every semester, and they really blow me away because they take experience from classroom to the real world and then come back to the classroom. So I think that's a really useful way to accelerate learning. Oops. The other is that cross-disciplinary view. I think we just got to go faster on that. So I think you know, it's time to bring all the really cool things that are happening in the computer science school and supercharge what's happening in the economics department. And I think it's starting to happen, but it should happen a lot faster. And that cross-disciplinary view is really powerful, and a lot of the innovation comes at the edges of all these disciplines coming together.
And that's not natural for academia, right? Because we live in our silos. And so to do that cross-disciplinary is something we're going to have to learn to do better.
Well, I think a way to learn is to rethink how you're measured and the impact factors, and say, you know, people should get rewarded for, you know, creating new disciplines altogether.
Mm-hmm. One of my old colleagues, Lee Fleming, he did some research on every patent ever done in the U.S. And he found that the most valuable patents are the ones that crossed patent classes. That if you stuck in your patent class, you tend to be much more incremental. When you crossed, great things happen. I think you're just saying that same thing with training and where we're going.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, because the last 4 hires I've done within the company, were civil engineers or engineers within the company, not technology people. And bringing them in, and then they have a propensity or interest in technology as well, but having that background and then applying technology to it, amazing things have happened with that combination. So I'm not just looking for IT people, I'm looking, having somebody who has that engineering background and discipline, and they're all PE certified professional engineers, and now it's pretty powerful with what they've done. So if colleges can learn from that, because I kind of by happenstance said, you have an interest, you have really great understanding of the concepts of engineering, come join us. So yeah, it's a great idea.
So does that say Agile IT, where everybody's working together, is the answer to the future of work?
I would, well, that's like a beer conversation. From a technologist perspective, I would love it to be true. From an industry that is mired in policy and lobby and power, as I was sitting here thinking, I was like, oh my God, what if you could unleash the computer scientists with the policy folks to kind of get a real good pulse on where trends are in the country and navigate quickly, so we don't have what's going on right now in Washington, DC policy is throwing something over the fence and it's dead on arrival. Throwing another thing over the fence and it's dead on arrival. But could you systematically meter and have those conversations to get a sense of policy? Interesting.
We technically can.
Okay, you and I are talking.
Well, there's this, I think 3 years ago, the winners of the MIT 100K were these kids from Harvard that actually applied all this text mining and create a workflow around for policymakers, and they're in DC, so they might be starting the revolution already.
Let's hope.
I think that goes to the notion of applied training or applied learning, and really focusing what we do and what we teach within academia towards application. A lot of times what we think about is the theory and not necessarily the application of that theory to real world problems. And I think that's the next step, is really getting bright individuals who have that foundational knowledge already pretty well understood, and applying it in some way, whether it's a specific project or whether it's a specific problem, really driving learning towards those applications.
So there's a question here also. You had mentioned, you got your volunteer army. You had mentioned putting charging systems into the ground. Mona comes up with crazy ideas all the time. and Ernest, I know you've got some. How do you get people to listen to these ideas?
This one is interesting philosophy. We're taking a very flipped organizational model. So rather than executive team telling down, the whole philosophy of KI, Qatar International, is it's really unleashing the power. So set the vision and the goals and unleash the power, because the moment an executive says, these are my goals and this is how you're doing it, you've now totally constrained the development and the spark of ingenuity that's happening in your company. And so, I'm watching that now, because there are times when you enter one of the results accelerator goals that I think I know what goal they're going to pick, and then they pick something that's crazy bigger. And you're like, oh hell, they're not gonna get that done in 90 days, and they do, because they weren't constrained in their thinking. And so it is what I find myself with an IT hat on and a former anthropologist watching how this is working, because that unleashing of people's passion really could be the fuel to growth. And if you unleash your passion outside of your company walls, then how does that also influence your company?
Well, I think that's part of our job as leaders, is to speak with passion too, to say that I'm just a little bit passionate about what I'm doing, and people see that and they sense that you're genuinely excited and energized. That is empowering. That by itself, as leaders, if we can get people to believe in something greater than they think is possible, and have that passion and excitement and energy, that's contagious. Yep. So I think as leaders, let's set that kind of a tone, to get people excited.
So another kind of resistance, though, that comes up, and there's a question here on unions. So unions are big in your role.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know whether they're big in your area. So you're going to change a lot of jobs that union workers have.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
how do you manage that discussion?
Yeah, well, you have to engage them
Okay.
from the beginning to understand that there's actually even bricklaying robots that lay a perfect row of bricks that, and that's a skilled craftsman that does that today. So how do we work with the unions to understand, well, what is the role going to be? So if this robot's going to lay this row of bricks faster and more precision than I could, what's my job going to be? So it's that working with them and understanding what is the future going to look like. Certainly there's lots of resistance and emotions there around that because it is highly unionized, especially on the construction side as to what we need to do. But early engagement and let them know what is the future. And I think that's the right way to do it versus surprise later and then try to bring them along.
And are the unions changing? So, for example, a friend of mine is an organizer for the Carpenter Union. And he said one of the things they've started doing is instead of doing hourly work, they're taking on the general contractor role.
Yeah.
Are you seeing things, and then they start to have a different viewpoint on what it means to get good work done?
And that's true, and we do a lot of subcontractors within our company as well, where we have specific outcomes that they will deliver, and they're responsible for the quality and delivery of that outcome. So the union sees that as well, and they understand that that is something that is required, and I think they are open to those concepts and producing an outcome. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our clients want outcomes. And what are we doing to try to achieve those outcomes?
So here's a big, broad, thank you. So here's a big, broad question for everybody that wants to answer it. As you're looking around at the kinds of jobs that you have in your organization or the organizations you know about, which ones are being eliminated and which ones are your priorities to complement them instead? Just classes of jobs. So for example, we know routine work is typically going away and being replaced.
Telephone work.
Okay.
Yep.
As far as the other end of things, though, which ones do you say these will be augmented, and how do you think about that?
Well, I think for us, the way that we're thinking about it is augmentation. And you were talking about telephone work potentially going away. We don't necessarily see telephone work going away because at some point, somebody's going to say, I don't want to talk to this bot, rip the ripcord and say, I want to talk to a live human. But what happens there is they're going to be expected to handle more calls or handle more people. And so your workforce isn't necessarily going to get completely decimated. It might shrink, and more productivity might be expected of them. And that's sort of the thinking that we have at Salesforce is how are we going to augment that? How are we going to supercharge the salespeople, even the entry-level salespeople with lead scoring, with machine learning? How are we going to supercharge the service worker to take those phone calls, to take more phone calls? And how are we going to supercharge the marketers to target their market more effectively? So I think the way that we think about it is it's not necessarily going to eliminate a whole host of jobs. It's going to augment a whole host of jobs. And the expectation that the company is going to place on these workers in terms of productivity is going to be increased because they're going to be augmented.
Yeah, I think the concept of outcome-based is really useful that you described. So, if I'm a law firm and I really want to show impact on outcome, or I'm hired to do an audit, and if I can be augmented with this technology, first of all, I have a competitive edge right now because if I can do that really well, I have done it because I brought domain expertise, deep understanding of the data, and then I added the technology on top of it. So for instance, in the audit space, what I can then offer is be your advisor on assessing risk rather than doing routine tasks. If I'm a law firm and I'm helping a general counsel, I might be able to really advise you on your legal strategy. And so you're getting a much better value from an outcome perspective. So, some of this depends on business models changing a little bit, but the value you create with this augmentation is so great that I think for a foreseeable future, if that is a competitive edge in the knowledge workspace, you have to do that type of work, and that those who would do it will get a tremendous amount of traction and will be differentiated.
There's a question here, and you are not reflective because you are all thinking through these processes, but the question is, will the evolution of work and these transformations, are they going to come from companies changing their work or from startups doing it differently? Now, I know you're different because you're all thinking about it, but in general, do you think other organizations are thinking about this strategically, about the nature of work? Or do you think they're going to have to get hit with somebody coming in and attacking them?
I think our industry is hearing and seeing examples of where others have already entered into some of our domain. My CIO, COO, and I have presented at CIO conferences in our industry, and everyone is more saying either we disrupt ourselves or be disrupted. So I think there is this competitive, someone else is coming in already and proposing things that is going to disrupt our model. So I'm hoping that's enough for us to change, although in the 3 years I've been in this journey with this company, I'd say that only a few of our competitors has really gotten it over that period of time. They all may be frightened during that conference or that engagement, and then they forget that, well, wait a minute, it won't happen.
We got other things to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Are there any jobs that are just safe?
Wow.
If you have supervisory skills, you're not touching things that are physical. You know, I think the closest that you could say to safe is people who do have that analytical background, that do have subject matter expertise, who are pliable and can maneuver their skills to advance the company. They're not so hardened and locked into what they're doing day to day that they can help transform the future. That's a rare breed. So I sit here thinking every role has to do some change in the future, maybe with the exception of people who have that truly cross-functional skill set and can think differently.
And it's interesting because we hear the robots can't do the social skills, but what I'm hearing from you is it's not social skills, that's not enough. We want to combine that with some other things to make it happen. One executive I talked to said, what we're really looking for is a personable quant. And they're having a hard time finding those people. So
you add to this, I think this, I think supervisory is so limiting. You're an anthropologist, and I think it's about storytelling, being able to drive change, but you can't, if you've done that before, but you didn't look at an analytic dashboard to make your decisions, that's not going to be good enough anymore.
That's right.
So I agree. Every job is going to be different. But it's, by the way, pattern recognition, I think the machine will get really good at that. Yeah. So
yeah, that one won't be. Cool. All right, so, we're getting close to the end here. If anybody has any more questions they want to put in, now's the time. Otherwise, I will just ask something. So let me know. So this is a CIO conference. And we're talking about things that are well beyond IT. Mm-hmm. Who owns this problem in the organization to think about the changing nature of work? Is it the CIO or is it somebody else? And how are you going to if not, how do you make that change happen?
I think it's a collaborative problem to face. Okay. It's both the CIO, it's the CHRO, it's the CFO, it's everybody, because at the end of the day, you are trying to deliver something to your employees or to your customers, and that's what you're trying to do. And so it's not going to be siloed in terms of this is the responsibility of the CIO, this is the HR is the responsibility of the CHRO, or the employee experience is the responsibility of the CHRO. IT affects the employee experience, right? Payroll affects the employee experience. All of that needs to come together because the employee doesn't care about the various departments or the back end. The employee only cares about their own experience within your organization. And so we're going to have to break down those barriers to deliver the best experience for our customer, for our employees, and for our partners.
And I think additionally, what our job as CIO is that we're going to have to educate the CHRO, the executives that we're partnering with, that is this real or not? And because sometimes they sometimes think that technology, and we've all seen the hype cycle. You have great expectation with the technology they're going to do, and then the trough of disillusionment of okay, it's not going to solve all of the world's problems, but yes, there is this capability that will then evolve over time. And they're trying to get a sense for, so how quickly, how real is this? What do I need to be doing now? Because that's a challenge to get that communicated. But it's our job to try to translate that into some context so that they can decide when's the appropriate time to take action. Because I believe now is the right time, but how do we articulate that in a way that it's real enough that we have to be taking some actions, and here's some of the first steps we should be doing. Kind of a roadmap, because if you put out that, hey, guess what, all of our engineers aren't going to have a job anymore because AI is going to take over all of it, and 3D printers are going to print everything in record time, they're going to say, yeah, whatever. Yes, that's going to happen eventually. But what is it that's going to happen this year? What's going to happen? What's happening right now that make it more real? Because that longer term inevitability certainly is important to put out there, but got to give them something a little more shorter term that they can react to, because otherwise it's just like, okay, that's great, but I can wait.
So we have some success story that I think are really staggeringly exciting for us with our CIO, and it was about thinking about the process differently. So our CIO visited our lab in Canada. We did a session around design thinking, and everybody went away. And about 6 months later, I found out that one of the ways we're approaching a significant digital transformation process, he was sitting next to me and he was talking about Agile sprints, and I'm looking at him and saying, did you just say sprint? And the fact is that instead of looking at, the way of working is different. So the pace of change is such that there is really an imperative to experiment and test ideas and to actually understand what's real and not. And there's a lot to be, so there's opportunity to just think about the work that a CIO does and have some learning from a different way of working, design thinking, rapid experimentation, to actually be able to keep up with the noise in the whole technology space. So I think that I've seen it happen, it works, it's unbelievable, and it should be an imperative to have a component that does that.
Thank you. So just a short answer, we got just a couple minutes left here. For everybody, just a short answer, the people in the room here, getting them ready for the future of work. What's your advice for everybody here on how to keep ready for the future of work?
I think you open up the conversation with the executive team, whether you're sitting here as a CIO or CTO or the technology side of the house. If you're the voice of reason that just says, I want to start thinking about this because what I'm doing today may harden my structure and I won't be as flexible in the future. So open the conversation up.
Thank you. Anybody else?
My advice is stay uncomfortable. Always be pushing and doing something that you're not certain of the outcome, you're not certain of what it's going to be. Just keep that uncomfort and be okay with the uncomfort of not knowing and keep pushing it.
I think it's just what I said earlier is think about your strategy or engage with your CEO and try to break down experiments so that you can actually test out the uncertainty in a way that's agile, and that's an imperative right now.
Yeah,
Last call.
I would say don't sugarcoat the change that's going to happen. Be realistic about it, but don't sugarcoat it in terms of, it's 10 years away. Like, be paranoid about it. And like you said, is be paranoid, experiment, and really use that type of agile methodology in terms of taking your organization on a journey, because they're gonna go on that journey whether or not they want to go on it. I think it's up to all of us to help people think about that journey and how do we be successful on that journey.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your insights. It's been a really fun conversation. Let's all thank the panelists.